Right, so today we are diving deep into a book that's causing quite a stir.
Oh, yeah.
The Feminist Agenda. How a movement for equality became a supremacy. Just the title alone, I mean...
Yeah, it's provocative.
Provocative, right? Like, where are we going with this?
It gets your attention.
It gets your attention for sure.
And it really sets the stage for, I think, a very interesting discussion.
For sure.
About, where feminism is today.
Yeah, and where it's going.
And where it's going.
And what's so interesting is that this book doesn't just sort of throw that word supremacy around.
Oh, right.
It really digs into specific areas.
Exactly.
We're talking education, the workplace,
Family court.
the welfare system.
Yeah, it kind of connects the dots between all these different areas and argues that there's this consistent thread of maybe female empowerment, sometimes at the expense of men, or traditional societal structure.
Right.
So, I mean, it's fascinating.
It is. And, they start off by taking us through a historical tour of feminism.
Yeah.
I mean, anyone listening to this is probably pretty familiar with, first wave, second wave, third wave.
Yeah, the suffragettes, all that kind of stuff.
But this book doesn't just rehash that history.
Right.
It's trying to pinpoint
There's a shift.
when things shifted.
When it went from equality to something a little bit more...
Assertive.
I think that's a good word for it.
Yeah.
And they actually, they talk about some of these early feminists,
Okay.
like Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, very instrumental, obviously.
In pushing for women's rights.
Absolutely. But the book argues that they maybe laid the groundwork for this...
For the shift.
For the shift.
Okay, so let's get into the specifics.
Sure.
One of the first areas the book dives into is education.
Okay.
And they actually drop this statistic
Oh, yeah.
about boys falling behind girls in school at every level.
Yeah.
And I've got to say, I mean...
It's kind of alarming.
Yeah, no matter what your perspective is on all of this, I mean,
Right.
It's a little bit alarming.
Well, and they don't just present the statistic. They dive into the why. Why is this happening?
Yeah, what are they saying?
So they're saying that, the education system as it currently exists is really failing boys. They point to things like, quote unquote, feminized teaching methods that may not resonate with boys' learning style.
Interesting.
There's a lack of strong male role models.
Yeah.
And just kind of this societal expectation that boys should, suppress their natural instincts.
Yeah. Be less, quote unquote, boyish.
Exactly.
Okay, so it's not just that boys are falling behind. It's like...
It's the why.
It's the why. It's the system.
Exactly.
And to illustrate this, they actually bring in this story of Tommy.
Yeah.
This young boy whose traditional, quote unquote, masculine traits are actually
Labeled as problematic.
in the school environment.
Yeah, and it's really interesting how they use that to kind of bring this, theoretical argument down to a
real world example.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It definitely has an impact.
And that's what I like about this book.
Me too.
It's not just, theoretical mumbo jumbo.
Yeah, it's very concrete.
They're giving us real world
Examples. Statistics.
to back up these pretty bold claims.
Yeah, for sure.
So, okay, we've got boys struggling in school, but
Right.
they don't stop there.
No, they don't.
We're going to the workplace.
Oh.
And this is where I think things get really interesting.
Buckle up.
Yeah, especially for anyone who's, climbed the corporate ladder.
Right.
Because the book is saying that, okay, women are rising rapidly in the workplace.
Which on the surface sounds great.
Sounds great.
Right. We want equality.
Yeah.
But the book is suggesting that maybe this is happening.
At the expense of men.
Of men.
Yeah.
So it's not just that women are climbing the ladder.
It's that men are being
Pushed off
the rungs.
Potentially, yeah.
And this is where things get really
Dicey.
controversial. Because they bring in this whole conversation about affirmative action and gender quotas, which, okay, initially those were intended to level the playing field.
Absolutely.
But the book is suggesting that
It's tilted.
that now it's tilted in the other
The
direction.
other way.
And men are actually being disadvantaged.
In some cases, yeah.
In some cases.
Yeah, and they give the example of...
James.
Yes.
Who loses his job to a woman who the book argues
Is less qualified.
is less qualified due to these quotas.
Right.
So James becomes this sort of
Poster child.
for,
This argument.
that men are being discriminated against in the workplace.
Yeah, it's a bold claim.
It is.
But this book doesn't shy away from bold claims.
Not at all.
And I think, again, it's making us think about the unintended consequences.
Unintended consequences of some of these policies that, on the surface,
Sound good.
Right.
Yeah.
Who wouldn't want a level playing field?
Exactly.
But are we actually
Creating more problems.
creating more problems
We're solving.
than we're solving?
And that's one of the things that makes this book so fascinating.
Yes.
Is that it challenges us to really think critically.
To look beyond the surface.
Look beyond the surface.
Yeah, and consider all sides of the issue.
Exactly.
So yeah, I'm really intrigued to dive deeper into this.
Me too. Let's keep going.
Okay.
What else do they talk about?
Well, Next up,
Okay.
family law.
Oh, boy.
And this is where things get
Really heated.
really heated.
Yeah, this is where the gloves come off.
Gloves come off for sure.
For sure. Oh, yeah. Family law is always a hot button issue.
It is. And this book really doesn't pull any punches.
No, their critique of the family court system is pretty scathing.
It is.
Yeah.
What's their main argument there?
Well, they argue that men are often portrayed as the villains in custody battle, and that child support rulings are frequently
Biased against them.
skewed against them. Yeah.
So it's like they're saying that the courts are automatically biased against fathers.
Yeah, even if they're good dads.
That's a pretty serious accusation.
It is, and they go even further. They suggest that the welfare system,
Mm-hmm.
as it's currently structured, actually incentivizes single motherhood, which further marginalizes men.
In the family unit.
Yeah.
So it's not just the court. It's like
The whole system.
the whole system is rigged against men.
That's their argument.
And they back this up with some pretty heartbreaking stories.
Oh, yeah, like the one about David.
Yeah, David, who loses custody of his kids.
And then gets hit with these
Exorbitant.
child support payments.
Yeah, it's tough to read those stories.
It is. It really is.
And, makes you wonder how much of this is true
Right. How much is perception?
and how much is reality.
Exactly.
The book doesn't just dwell on the negative.
No, it doesn't.
They also talk about the rise of the men's rights movement
Yes, and they frame it as a direct response
to this perceived
feminist power grab.
power grab.
Yeah, they portray the men's rights movement as this voice for men who feel disenfranchised, penalized by a system that they believe is stacked against them.
So they're acknowledging that there are men out there who are feeling the pain
Absolutely.
of this so-called feminist agenda.
Yes, and they connect it to
To some serious issues.
some serious societal issues.
What are they pointing to?
Well, they talk about the war on masculinity.
Okay, that's a loaded term.
It is. But they argue that society is systematically demonizing.
Additional masculine traits.
Yes, labeling them as toxic
Interesting.
and encouraging men to suppress their natural instincts,
So it's like we're telling boys,
to be less boyish.
right, but then at the same time,
We're telling women to be more assertive
to lean in
in the workplace.
So it's like a double bind.
Exactly.
Like, what are men supposed to do?
Right, where do they fit in?
Yeah, and the book is saying that this confusion,
Has real consequences
real world consequence.
for both men and women.
Like what?
Well, they link the suppression of masculinity
Okay.
to things like rising rates of male depression and suicide.
Wow.
And they suggest that men are feeling lost and purposeless in a society that no longer values their unique contributions.
It's a pretty bleak outlook.
It is, but the book doesn't just stop at laying out the problem.
Okay, so what do they propose? What are some of the solutions they offer?
Well, they talk about the need for men to take responsibility for their own lives,
Oh,
to stop seeing themselves as victims.
So it's kind of a pull yourself up by your bootstraps message.
In a way, yes, but it's more nuanced than that.
Okay.
They also acknowledge the systemic factors that are working against men, and they call for changes in policy and law to address those inequalities.
So it's not just about individual men changing.
Right.
It's about societal change as well.
Absolutely.
But how do we actually do that? Do they get into specific?
They touch on some concrete solutions like reforming the family court system, rethinking the way we educate boys, and challenging the media's portrayal of masculinity.
So it's a multi-pronged approach.
Yes, and they acknowledge that it's going to take a lot of work
And collaboration
from both men and women
to create a more equitable society.
Exactly.
All right, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have
Education, the workplace, family law, the men's rights movement.
the war on masculinity.
But there's one more piece of the puzzle we haven't talked about yet.
Oh, and what's that?
The media.
Ah, yes, the media.
So what's the book's take on the role of the media in all of this?
Well, they argue that the media is complicit in promoting this feminist agenda.
Okay, how so?
They claim that the media consistently portrays women as victims and men as aggressors, and that this narrative is constantly reinforced in news stories, movies, TV shows, you name it.
So they're saying that the media is basically brainwashing us into accepting this idea of female supremacy.
Well, they don't use the word brainwashing,
Okay.
but they definitely suggest that the media is playing a powerful role in shaping our perceptions of gender.
And, we've been hearing about media bias for decades,
We have.
but this book is arguing that it's gone beyond just bias.
Right, it's become something more insidious.
Yeah, it's actively driving this shift towards female supremacy.
Exactly. They're saying the media is no longer just reflecting reality.
It's shaping it.
It's shaping it, and that's a scary thought.
It is, because if we can't even trust the media to give us an objective view of the world,
Right, then what can we trust?
it's a good question, and it's one that the book doesn't really answer.
No, it leaves us grappling with this idea that the very information we consume
Is being filtered.
through a lens that may be distorted.
It's like they're saying we're living in a matrix.
a carefully constructed reality designed to keep women in power.
Yeah, it's a provocative image.
It is, and I think a lot of people will find it unsettling.
Especially those who believe in gender equality.
Exactly, because if this book is right,
then the fight for equality has been hijacked.
Twisted into something that's actually harmful to both men and women.
Yeah, that's a tough pill to swallow.
It is, but it's a conversation that needs to be had.
I agree, and I think it's important to reiterate that this is just one book, one perspective.
Absolutely.
It's not the be-all and end-all of the debate on feminism.
Not at all. It's essential to seek out diverse perspectives on this issue.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the book's strengths.
I agree.
It sparks debate, it gets people talking, it encourages us to think critically
About these complex issues.
about gender, about society, about where we're headed.
Exactly.
All right, so we're back, and we've been through a lot with this book, The Feminist Agenda.
We have. It's quite a journey.
It is a journey, yeah. And we've talked about education and the workplace, family courts, this whole war on masculinity idea.
Right. It's a lot to unpack.
It is. And now I'm kind of curious, where does the book see all this heading? What about the future?
Yeah, what's the end game here? Well, the book doesn't have, a crystal ball or anything.
Right.
But it definitely paints a picture of a society that's kind of at a crossroad. We're at this tipping point, and the decisions we make now are going to have huge consequences down the line.
So it's more of a warning than like a specific prediction.
Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. It's like a wake-up call.
Okay.
Like, hey, pay attention. This is what could happen if we don't course correct.
And what are they saying could happen?
Well, they argue that if we keep going down this path of, unchecked female empowerment, it could lead to a future where men are basically pushed to the margin, where traditional family structures are eroded, and ultimately, the very fabric of our civilization is threatened.
It's a pretty bleak outlook.
It is. It's definitely a worst-case scenario.
Yeah, but is there any hope? Does the book offer any solutions? How do we avoid this dystopian future?
Well, it's not all doom and gloom. The book does offer some glimmers of hope.
Okay, like what?
Well, for one thing, they emphasize the importance of personal responsibility.
Okay.
They encourage men to step up, to take control of their own lives.
So not just blaming women or the feminist movement.
Right. It's about men taking ownership of their own destinies, developing their strengths, finding ways to thrive in this changing world.
So it's like a call to action for men.
Yeah, in a way it is. It's like, hey, don't just sit back and complain. Do something about it.
Okay, I like that.
And they also talk about the importance of strong families, strong communities.
So there's more traditional structure.
Yeah, they see those as essential for a healthy society. They provide a foundation for raising kids, for building strong communities.
Right, for passing on value.
Exactly. So it's not just about individual men change. It's about rebuilding those institutions that they argue have been weakened by modern feminism.
It's interesting because that's a pretty conservative viewpoint.
It is, but I think it's one that a lot of people, even those who aren't necessarily conservative, can connect with.
Yeah, I think you're right. There's this sense that maybe things have gone too far.
Yeah, like the pendulum has swung too far in one direction.
And maybe we need to find a bit more balance.
Exactly. And I think this book is tapping into that feeling.
Okay, so big picture, what's the takeaway message here? What do they want us to do?
Well, I think the ultimate message is one of hope, not despair.
Ooh.
It's a call to action, but it's also a call for understanding, for dialogue. They're saying, let's recognize the challenges, let's talk honestly about them, and let's work together to create a better future.
And that together part is important.
It's crucial because we're not going to solve these problems by fighting each other.
Right, we need to find common ground.
Exactly. And I think that's one of the most important things this book does.
Yeah.
It challenges us to move beyond the us versus them mentality.
To see the bigger picture.
Yeah, to have more nuanced conversation about gender, about society, about where we're going as a culture.
Well said, well said. And I think that's a good place to wrap up our deep dive into the feminist agenda.
Yeah, I think we've covered a lot of ground.
We have. And it's been fascinating, thought-provoking, challenging at times.
Absolutely.
But I hope it's been helpful for our listeners.
Me too. I encourage everyone to check out the book for themselves.
Yeah, read it with an open mind and see what you think.
And form your own conclusions.
Exactly. And if you want to dive deeper into this, you can find The Feminist Agenda, How a Movement for Equality Became a Supremacy on Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books.
Yeah, just search for the title. It's easy to find.
So that's it for this episode of The Deep Dive. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, everyone.